Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. It's show number 581 on the 7th of December, which of course is Pearl Harbor Day, actually. So in today's show, what have we got? A woman has been found guilty of murder after a deliberate hit and run attack on an e-bike rider. An ITV star has been given points and a fine after hitting a scooter rider. A coroner's court has sadly heard how a police rider died after losing control on a blue light run. And then we've got some news in brief from the UK and around the world before we look at some new barriers. These are sort of an interesting roller design. But we'll also have a look at some barriers which have been removed by the New Zealand Transport Agency after just a year, and they look really, really scary to me, bacon slicers. Norton have brought in an unlimited mileage warranty, but it only lasts 3 years. Peugeot bring back the 103 step-through, but with electric power. QJMotor have revived the middleweight V4, and then we'll look at the in-depth item today, which asks if the Chinese manufacturers are starting to replay the Honda Yamaha war of the late 70s and early 80s, which you may remember. So settle yourselves down with a brew for the next 40 minutes or so as I take you through some topical news, some potentially controversial views. And we'll just start out as well with a quick shout out to last week's coffee supporters and subscribers: Howard, Nick, James, Kelvin, Hallam, and Melvin, Chris, Vito, NJ, ENR. They all grabbed the Cyber Monday offer, which is still available today, and that'll be it. I will remove it tonight. Nora, who downloaded the Survival Skills ebook, and Anonymous, of course. Thank you to all of you very much indeed for your support. Right, okay, so let's get on with the first part of the show. Now, the first story that I just want to cover is something that dropped into my inbox last week. And it was a story with the headline: "The government's latest road casualty figures released this morning confirm a grim reality. Motorcycle deaths are rising despite years of warning from road safety experts." And the article continued that the data should shock politicians, drivers, and policymakers out of complacency. And this was apparently all put together by a road safety expert. Now, the rise isn't a mystery, apparently, but the article continues: "The result of a culture that treats motorcyclists as an afterthought. Motorcyclists aren't invisible because they can't be seen. They're invisible because drivers aren't actually looking. Every week I see cases where a basic lifesaver glance may have prevented a devastating collision." Well, what can I say about that? I've spent a dozen years plus now explaining that the human visual perception system isn't that simple, and the belief that drivers simply don't look in this way is actually deeply flawed. And the science, I've documented it in the Science of Being Seen, and it's been there available for anybody to read if they want to for 5 decades too. So what about this rising death rate story? Well, have a look at this particular image. I'm sure that I have shown it to you before a couple of weeks ago. Again, just give you a zoom in on that. And this, as you can see from the heading on it, is the reported road casualties, or road fatalities rather, by road user, Great Britain, year ending June 2025, provisional, compared with the year ending June 2024. So this basically is the data that this expert is relying on. And if you look, you'll see that in fact there is a little kick up at the end for motorcyclists. Numbers do go up. But if you look at it, it's actually more or less flatlining, not dissimilar, in fact, to what's is going on for pedal cyclists. Pedestrian casualties have trended slightly downwards, and car occupants with some blips have also trended somewhat downwards. But what we're looking at here is not a scary rise. So, who exactly is this expert in road safety? Well, let me show you a picture. There we go. There she is. It's Mary Lomas, and she is apparently at one of the UK's leading motorcycle injury specialists, Fletcher's Solicitors. Now, about the only thing that I agree with in her statement is that these injuries are not inevitable, they are preventable. But we won't prevent them if we continue to blame drivers. We've been trying that for decades and it hasn't worked. So, who are Fletchers? Well, you probably guessed they are no win, no fee ambulance chases. They allegedly deduct up to 25% of a settlement claim over and above the costs already paid to them direct by the third party insurer if they win. So, I'll leave it to you to decide just why they might be repeating myths like drivers don't look. And if you want the actual data source that I've just shown you, then you can go here, and I'll just pop this up on screen for you. So this is the actual DFT data from .gov.uk. Right, who have we got in? Nick's looked in, so good morning. And Kevin says he has to help with a vehicle recovery, so we'll watch later. Okay, well, nice to see you all the same. Okay, so there's the link. It appears to have truncated itself into two pieces. Nothing to do with me. That's obviously the system. I've exceeded the character limit. But if you want to get the, basically, there it is. Go to .gov.uk government statistics reported casualties. You should be able to find it. Anyway, right, travelling onwards. Meanwhile, whilst looking around, I found a link to a mystery story on Motorcycle News. At least I found the online links to it with snippets of text, which they said, now this is quite interesting, data suggests that shifts in motorcycle buying behaviour could be responsible for fewer deaths. I do note there that the behaviour is spelled in the American way. I've just spotted that. And, quote, the drop in popularity of the sports bike could be partly responsible for the lowering numbers of motorcycle deaths over the past 20 years. Now, this was apparently written by Charlotte King. That's the name that is attached to these snippets. I couldn't find the source of this claim because by the time I went to follow the story up, the actual link had vanished. Now, it may have been a draft that would have been prematurely published in error. I've done that myself in the past. Or it might have been retracted, maybe data errors or editorial concerns. I simply don't know. Now, what I do know over in the US, and that links back to what I just said about the American spelling of behavior. A couple of studies did conclude that riders on sport bikes had greater odds of serious injury crashes than riders on other types. But here in the UK, I've been unable to find any credible evidence for a matching decline in sports bike sales and reduced fatalities. Now, that's hardly surprising since UK casualty data sets don't actually systematically record the type of motorcycle, and that makes it very hard to do something like link the sort of the type of bike to the fatality numbers. Anyway, so if anybody knows anything about that, I'd be more than interested to find out. Another quick snippet here. Now, a few days ago, I got a question from Peter regarding my coffee posts archive. He asked, can you tell me how I can search the posts archive? I can't see any way to do it. I sometimes have specific queries and wanted to search your post for your views. It would be most helpful. Now, unfortunately, Coffee doesn't come with any built-in search facility, but I did come up with one suggestion, which he thought was a good one. Now, each year of my tips on Tuesday, skills on Saturday posts, they're listed on a unique page. So there's around 100 posts on each of these pages. They go back to 2014, incidentally. So we're just finishing the 2025 year. So that'll be 12 years worth. Each of those pages is linked in turn via the main index, which you can find if you want to go and look at it. It's here. So this is the main index page, and that'll take you straight to the list of those 12 years of posts. Now, my suggestion was that he opened up each year in yearly index and then used the built-in search facility in Windows. All we have to do is press Control F, and that will actually pop up a search box, and then you can do a keyword search, and it will search through the text that is on the screen. And if you've typed in something interesting like corner, for example, you'll find that for 2015 it lists 3 posts on the 14th of July, the 28th of July, and also the 18th of April. Now there must be a similar option on a Mac, but I am not familiar with it. Right, okay. Quick aside from Richard, he says bikers had a meeting this week with the PCC from Avon and Somerset to discuss the high level of bike theft locally. I actually think I mentioned that was planned last week, Richard, in last week's show, but thanks very much indeed for pointing that out. I know there was a similar meeting in Edinburgh, actually, which left, I think, the motorcyclists attending rather dissatisfied. Right, anyway, let's move on, and we have the weather for bikers coming up. If I can get the right image up on screen. There we go, that's the right one. Now, obviously, we're in December. Weather's not very good at this time of year in the UK, and we are into a distinctly unsettled period of weather. There are storms on the horizon for some, but interestingly, temperatures will be well above the seasonal average. It's actually 15 here in London on a damp morning, and I must turn the radiators off because it's getting pretty warm in here. So today, what's happening is a low pressure system is sweeping a band of wind and heavy rain north and west. It will start bright if you happen to be up in the north of Scotland and the far northeast of England. The rain will reach all those parts by evening. Now tomorrow, after a drier day with plenty of bright spells across England, Wales and Northern Ireland, there will be some rain over Scotland in the morning. The weather does go seriously downhill as the day goes on. The Met Office has actually issued a yellow warning for rain for Monday for parts of the south and central England and South Wales, and there is a potential for disruption as this heavy rain and strong winds spread eastwards later in the day, and that is likely to cause flooding on the already saturated surfaces. Now Tuesday, it looks like this rain will linger in the north. It'll become confined to the far north and northwest later. In the south, it looks like a brighter day with some showers, but it will remain windy, as will Wednesday, which looks showery across the west and brighter in the east. Beyond that, predictions are uncertain, so check your local forecast. Right, so if you're planning a ride anywhere, doesn't look like the greatest of weather for us the next few days. Okay, and on to some news items. Well, the first story is about a woman from Bournemouth. She's been found guilty of murder after deliberately driving into an e-bike rider during the early hours of the 9th of April earlier this year. Zoe Treadwell, 36, was also found guilty of attempting to murder a second man and causing grievous bodily harm with intent to a third man following a second collision which happened in May. Now, in the April incident, 2 e-bikes were chased at high speed by a Range Rover. It struck one of the bikes, then carried on. The rider, 28-year-old Joey Johnston from Bournemouth, was pronounced dead at the scene, having suffered a traumatic head injury. The second collision in May involved a Mercedes that mounted the pavement and hit an e-bike, knocking the rider and the pillion passenger off, and that vehicle also left the scene. The rider, the 33-year-old Joshua Lovell, he suffered multiple fractures, but his pillion passenger, the 30-year-old Free Jenkins, had unfortunately part of a leg amputated. Now, a second defendant, John J. Harrison, 25, also from Bournemouth, he was found guilty of attempted murder and grievous bodily harm with intent in relation to the May collision. And 2 others, an 18-year-old man and a 17-year-old youth, were found not guilty of murder and manslaughter in respect of the death of Mr. Johnston. Now, having launched separate investigations, Wiltshire Police established a link between the incidents, and it appears to be connected to a grievance, that's the word in the report, which had arisen between one group of associates and another. Now, Treadwell and Harrison will be sentenced at a later date. ITV star Holly Willoughby has been found guilty of driving without attention and due care following a collision with a scooter rider in which the rider suffered a fractured neck and a broken toe. She was driving her Mini Cooper in Richmond in London on August the 28th, and she commenced a right turn without signalling as the scooter rider was overtaking at around 20 miles per hour. So she was given 6 points on her license and fined £1,653 at Lavender Hill Magistrates Court. She'll also have to pay £130 in costs and a £661 victim surcharge. In Essex, the coroner's court has heard how a serving police officer died when he lost control of his motorcycle on the southbound A12 whilst responding on blue lights to an incident. PC Matthew Parker, 43, was collided with the central barrier in this collision on November the 19th. He suffered traumatic head injuries at the scene near Ingatestone. PC Parker joined Essex Police in 2010, and he'd worked on the Norton local policing team and most recently with the Chigwell Roads policing team. Right, okay. Quick break while I get my voice back. I've got a bit of a cold this morning, so hopefully my voice will hold out. As always, can I ask you to take a moment to like and subscribe to this show if you've not already done so? Every click helps other motorcyclists discover my content, or simply share the word the old-fashioned way by telling your riding buddies about Elevenses. They can watch on catch-up. Remember, my latest riding skills articles are always free, and you can get all the links delivered weekly to your email inbox by subscribing to my newsletter at survivalskills.substack.com. Or you can use this QR code to jump straight to it, when the show's over of course. No spam, and if you don't like the content, unsubscribe at any time. If you enjoy these shows,
that's not supposed to happen. Right, I've just screwed up that somehow. Let me get me back to my news item. I want to get that back up. There it is. Right, okay. So where was I? I was just about to tell you the newsletter. I've actually unsubscribed some 150 odd people who basically weren't opening any of the emails. I don't see any point sending an email to anybody who signed up and then doesn't open it. So if you have been unsubscribed by me and you do want to continue to receive the email, you'll have to resubscribe. But I don't like my inbox cluttered up with unwanted emails. So if you're not opening them, I'm assuming you're not interested. Right, okay, in brief, news from around the world and from the UK. The first story is an interesting one. The designer behind Norton's rebrand, Jerry McGovern, has just been fired by Jaguar, and allegedly he was escorted out of his office earlier in the week. His removal comes a year after the unveiling of the radical Type 00 concept car, which is met with best described as mixed opinions. So far, Jaguar has no comment on the situation, but the move comes less than a week after a new CEO apparently took over. In Croydon, a Ducati dealership that opened in 1999 has shut. The closure was due to very difficult conditions in the industry, and the shop was said to be no longer capable of operating. The sister site, though, Ducati London in Vauxhall, remains open. On the other hand, Motorbikes for All is set to open a new site in Newent in the Forest of Dean. The company is moving from their current Malvern site to a 59,000 square foot former ladder factory. Currently, they stock around 700 motorcycles, but under the new roof, they plan to open with over 1,000 bikes in one place. Now, in the US, Kawasaki says they will have to raise prices on motorcycles by about 17% to offset the impact of the Trump tariffs on imports. Now, machines assembled in Kawasaki's Nebraska facility rely on engines and other components being delivered from Japan. Now, CEO Yoshinori Kanehana, he said on Bloomberg TV last week that the rich people will buy it, which sounds like a pretty dangerous, provocative statement to me. He also said that the tariffs may affect the company's plans to hire around 4,000 workers for its plant. Now, ironically, that Nebraska facility was actually constructed in response to a tariff imposed on imported motorcycles by a previous US administration.
And in Thailand, a top lawyer and the president of a provincial lawyers association shot a motorcyclist in the arm during a road rage incident on Monday morning. The motorcycle rider was reported to have repeatedly cut across the car, and when they stopped, an argument followed. The victim was hospitalized. The court officer was arrested. Now, here's an interesting little story. TVAM are donating 2 retired police motorcycles and a Range Rover to Ukraine through the Pickups for Peace initiative. The machines were delivered in person this summer. DCI Mike Bettington, he said, it's really pleasing to see vehicles that would otherwise go unused making such a difference in Ukraine. Here are the 2 bikes in the Lviv police livery with their new riders. Now, moving on rapidly to a story about barriers. Now, I've got 2 stories. We'll start with this one. Now, a short while ago, a few days, I saw a sort of glowing report on these guardrails. They're a sort I've never seen before. Now, they're designed to improve on the traditional sort of W-beam, what we tend to call Armco, the sort of concrete barriers that you just find in the middle of the road. These are EVA roller barriers, also known as rolling or rotating guardrails. Now, apparently they were first developed in South Korea. They've since been adopted in other parts of Asia. They're found in the Middle East and also in South America, and apparently also in Australia. And they're mainly put in on high-risk curves on mountain roads, and they say at busy junctions. So here you can see one which is obviously on the edge of a drop on a bend. Now, instead of being a fixed steel rail, what they use are these rows of energy-absorbing polymer rollers, which are mounted on steel posts. Now, what happens when the car strikes the barrier is that the rollers actually spin, and that converts some of the crash energy into the sort of rotational movement, which reduces the severity of the impact for the car occupants, which is a good thing. But at the same time, they also guide the vehicle more smoothly along the barrier than conventional sort of W-shaped barriers, preventing bounce back into the carriageway. The system is modular, it's brightly coloured for visibility, and it is also said to be easier to repair than the traditional W-beam steel rails. Now, sounds good, but whilst the system shows promising results for cars, it does appear to remain largely untested for motorcycles. And as far as I can tell, the certification standards to date focus almost entirely on car impacts. So if that's the case, it does look like more testing is required to confirm they don't introduce new risks for motorcycles, which brings me to my second barrier story, and that's this one. This particular barrier was installed in March last year on a 2.7 kilometre long stretch of the Ruby Bay bypass near Nelson. I suspect that's been a road that's been built since I rode in those parts. The startup company spent 5 years developing it. They spent 10 million NZ dollars, and they were reported to be gobsmacked because they discovered that it was due to be removed earlier this year. The New Zealand Transport Agency, Waka Kotahi, they said that the system had a number of issues, including problems with the welds. Now, I'll just zoom in on that a little bit for you to show you it in a bit more detail, and you can see exactly what it looks like. It is thin sheets of metal supported by those posts. Now, I've never been a fan of the wire rope barriers, even though speaking to experts in the NZTA suggested that where they've been deployed in New Zealand, they've actually saved more motorcyclists from crossover collisions with vehicles that basically would have come through the median barrier if there was no wire rope there, than injuries have been caused to riders who've lost control and hit those barriers. But my first thought looking at this is it takes the risk to riders to an entirely new level. I mean, it just looks like a bacon slicer, frankly, more than a safety barrier. So I've got a lot of questions about those, and I would love to know if they were ever tested against motorcyclists. If anybody down under knows anything at all about these barriers, I would be very interested indeed. So please do drop me a line if you possibly can. If you enjoy these shows, why not become a member of my Coffee pages? Just follow the QR code and sign up. As a member, you get free access to the latest articles and the Survival Schools ebook shop with instant downloads of everything from free mini ebooks to ebook versions of my paperbacks. Become a one-off supporter and you'll open up the archive of over 1,000 articles. If you buy me a monthly cuppa as a subscriber, there's even more content to enjoy.
Right. Okay. So on with the bike news. Now, Norton is promising an unlimited mile warranty on all its motorcycles, presumably to ensure that there are no lingering doubts about the reliability of the new TVS built machines. The warranty is fully transferable. It also comes with a comprehensive roadside assistance package, just in case. Presumably, though, the machine will only stay in warranty if you get it serviced by Norton dealers. And there's one other tiny catch. You can ride as many miles as you like, but only for the first 3 years. After that, the warranty expires. Now, the more I look into the protracted development of electric sports bikes, which mostly remain vaporware or very limited runs at very silly prices, the more I'm convinced that the sensible aim for electric motorcycles is not going to be the performance end of the market. Now, though machines like the Zero Range have enough real-world performance, they get well beyond the speed limit and they have more than sufficient acceleration to keep many riders happy. The trade-off, of course, is range. If you want to use that performance, you simply can't ride very far. So who wants to eke out the range of the DSX-RX adventure bike, for example, up to its full 180 miles claimed by riding at city centre speed? Because that's what you will have to do to get there. Now, the limitation is energy density. The battery capacity is limited by size and weight, and we're on the limit of that at the moment. There's plenty of promising new battery technologies for the future, but none ready for the here and now. So I'd say it's pretty obvious that e-moto development really should be aimed at the lower end of the market, so urban short-range commuter machines, and that's pretty obviously where this machine is targeted. So again, let's give you a bit of a zoom in picture on that. This is the new Peugeot electric step-through. It revives the 103 model name, which dates back to the 70s apparently, and when it used to be a sort of a pedal to start petrol engine step-through. There's a pair of these bikes built on this platform. There's a moped equivalent, and there's another with a higher output for an A1 license. Now, unlike the old steel frames of the past, the new machine gets an aluminium monocoque frame, and it also gets KR upside down forks at the front, which is probably over-egging what the bike needs. And there's a monoshock rear end as well, with a full linkage apparently. You also get a TFT dash, and the brakes look like a definite upgrade over the old machine. Now, the range from the batteries, which are removable and chargeable on the standard mains supply, thought to be around 30 miles, 50 kilometers for the lower powered machine, and maybe 40 miles, 65 kilometers for the second machine. Now, no performance figures yet, though the lower powered bike will be limited to 50 kph for the license class. That's 28 miles per hour, and no price either. Expect to see them appearing next year. Quite a nifty looking little in-town commuter. Now, switching to petrol, the name Equus, it's spelled EQVVS. It apparently draws inspiration from the imagery of freedom and primal power, serving as a tribute to the pure spirit of speed and machinery, a symbol of mankind's most soulful creation in the mechanical age. Now, presumably, the name is a nod to the horse, and I'm guessing they couldn't actually use Equus, spelled EQUUS, because Hyundai build a car under that name. But I would note that the species in the genus Equus actually includes the ass too. So think about that. Anyway, I'm sure you've guessed it's not four legs pushing this thing along, but it is something we haven't seen for a little while. It's a mid-sized 561cc, 16-valve overhead, double overhead cam, liquid-cooled V4 engine, and it churns out just under 70 horsepower at 10,500 RPM, 39
or 54 Newton meters of torque arriving at 8,000 RPM, depending on which source you read. I suspect it might be the lower number rather than the former. Now, aside from that, there are absolutely no details about this bike, whether it will go into production or not, and there's no indication of any kind of cost. But it is interesting to look at. Right, okay, so that brings us directly to the in-depth item today. Now, back when I started this webcast, March 2020, for those who don't remember, reporting on a new Chinese machine was fairly unusual. And the new machines were mostly targeted at the less powerful end of the spectrum. They were just starting to get into sort of the 300cc category. But over the last 5 years, and particularly over the last 12 months, hardly a day has gone by without a new Chinese machine appearing. And they are challenging in just about every market, from the sort of power cruisers and most recently the sort of performance sports bikes. So this bike doesn't look entirely out of place at all. Sort of, I suppose, what would you call it? A power cruiser? I don't know, a cafe racer, whatever. The Milan show last month were flooded with new machines from China. But what it's beginning to remind me of is the Honda Yamaha wars. Now, if you have a long enough biking background, you probably remember how in the late 1970s and the early 80s, Yamaha aggressively expanded their model range and their production volume. And what they were trying to do was actually take over Honda's seat as the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer. Now, it required huge investments in R&D and in factory production capacity. So what did Honda do? Well, they responded in kind. They also upped their output of motorcycles. And what happened next was this developed into a sort of a full-blown industrial arms race. And both companies started pumping out ever more new models. Now, if you don't remember what happened next, the rapid sort of appearance and turnover of these ranges, it actually led to heavy discounting because both companies were now trying to grab the market share. And by 1985, Yamaha was dangerously exposed with excess stock on hand and massive debts. Where have we heard that story recently? Hint, a certain Austrian manufacturer. And Yamaha, to survive, needed a major rescue package, and this came from its banks, and they imposed cuts on output and the range, and they enforced a more longer term strategic planning. Now, Honda survived intact, but basically having won out, they very rapidly trimmed their range back too. Now, the question that sort of struck me as I was looking at this particular bike, as I say, this one here, which just popped up in my feed the other day, is the Chinese motorcycle industry going through a boom just like this, a similar phase of sort of hyper expansion, if you will, because we're certainly seeing something very similar now, because models are appearing at a pretty frantic pace and many are overlapping each other. So the main Chinese brands, QJMotor, QJMotor, who own Benelli incidentally, the Vosges Lonsin Group, Zontes, Bender, Cove, and there are many, many others. They all do appear to be in this cycle of launching a sort of a bike for every niche, from adventure tourers to scramblers. There are cruisers, there are sports nakeds, there are retro roadsters, there are sort of rally raid style bikes, and there are even mini bikes. There's parallel development of multiple engine families. There's everything from parallel V-twins, inline and V4s. There's even apparently a boxer concept somewhere. And they're upsizing from the sort of starter bikes that they were building 5 years ago, right up to challenge the premium machines from the likes of Ducati and so on, Triumph. Now, is it sustainable? Well, possibly. The Chinese domestic market is enormous. It's far larger than the Japanese domestic market ever was back in the early 1980s, even when you throw in the bikes that they exported to Europe and the US. And basically what that does, of course, is it gives those manufacturers a huge home base to build on, but there still are risks, I'd suggest. Short-lived models and fast-changing platforms, they are a real issue. Now, if you rapidly turn over bikes so that they're only produced for 2 or 3 years, it must be a genuine concern over long-term spares availability and how dealers can actually support you if you've bought a bike which is suddenly discontinued. That will impact resale values, potentially, of course, putting off new buyers in the first place. And the smaller brands could easily overreach, and then they could fold. Exactly what happened to some Japanese firms back in the 1960s, incidentally, when that country began to penetrate Western markets. Bridgestone is always the one that springs to my mind at this point. Others may pull back from some export markets. We've just seen Moto Morini, for instance, shut down here in the UK. Now, if I had to guess, and I'm sure you'd like me to, wouldn't you? My guess is that after this phase of rapid expansion, there will come a phase of consolidation. And the big players I just mentioned include sort of CFMoto, QJMotor, Benelli, Lancing Vosges, maybe Cove, will probably survive to dominate. But the sort of the boutique brands with sort of poor selling models will likely disappear. I mean, history simply suggests that this current sort of frenzy can't continue. Right. Couple of comments. Yeah, Nick says the government stats link seems to be truncated. Yes, I did mention that, Nick. What's happened is that the character length has exceeded what I can actually put up in a comment. So if you look at the next comment down below it, you'll find the last few characters that belong to the link. There's nothing I can do about that, unfortunately. I didn't realize the link was that long, or I might have gone to sort of tiny URL or something and given you the link that way. Anyway, Nick also says that the bacon slicer doesn't look nice, and I entirely agree with that. Right, so anything else to say? I'm trying to get rid of that. There we go, off the. Nick also says that he remembers the Honda Yamaha Spat, and oh, that's interesting. He says President Macron is in China, basically begging the Chinese to stop being so clever in technology and in production capability. Okay, that's news to me. I hadn't seen that. I'll have to look that story up for myself. Right, okay. So that is it for today. Just before we go, I will do my usual reminder. There is, of course, my Survival Skills 8-week e-course. I'm running one right at the moment for a couple of people. It consists of 8 sections, offering modules, delivering a mix of theory, some thoughtful questions to get you thinking, and some carefully designed practical exercises to try out on the road, although possibly not next week. Plenty of interaction. There are resources to download. There are videos to watch. You can ask your own questions. You can upload your own photos. You can even send me on-bike videos if you want to. So each course includes a couple of webinar-style meetings to discuss the course and how we're getting on. And when you get to the end, there is also an informative 9th week for free. So if you want to sign up, the place to go is via my QR code here. That'll take you direct to the sign up page. Now, e-courses, not everybody's cup of tea. I know that for sure. But if you're open-minded, I think you will be surprised just how effective they are. And just £79, 10 a week, that's less than a tank of fuel or even breakfast on your Sunday morning ride out. So that's it for today. Thanks to everybody who has looked in, either live on Catch Up. You've been watching 11ses from Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. Make a date to join me for the next show for another roundup of news, views, and biking tips. And if you're out there enjoying the ride today on the bike, do make sure that you stay shiny side up, and then I will see you for the next show.